Detroit had seen many engines roar back to life, but none quite like this. In a forgotten workshop at the edge of the city, William Bill Turner pinned a challenge to the wall. "Whoever can bring this machine back to life will have a job today." The machine wasn't ordinary. It was a Caterpillar V8 prototype that had defeated even the best engineers. Word spread fast. Soon a crowd gathered. Among them stood David Miller, a polished MIT graduate, armed with tools worth thousands. Confidence dripped from his smile, but then, through the crowd, shuffled a man with torn boots and weary eyes, Samuel Brooks, known only as the homeless drifter by the train station. No tools, no resume, only a strange calm in his hands. No one believed he could even try, but Bill's gaze said otherwise, and in that silence the story began. The sign over Turner's garage had long since lost its paint. Letters once proud now flaked like old bark, and the neon "Open" buzzed even when it wasn't. Inside, the air held the honest smell of cut steel, brake dust and black coffee that had boiled too long on a hot plate. It was Saturday, and the city's hum was a dull backdrop to a different kind of noise, the slow tick of cooling metal and the restless whisper of a crowd forming where no crowd usually stood. Bill Turner moved like a man who had memorized every creak of his floorboards. 68 and stubborn, he wore a denim shirt with sleeves rolled twice and a wedding ring polished by decades of work. He stood beside the Caterpillar V8 prototype, big as a small wardrobe, yellow under a film of grey, its manifolds off, flywheel locked, timing cover on like a sealed secret. A paper notice with his challenge was taped to the pegboard near the time clock. People took pictures of it like it was a relic. "You sure about this, Bill?" asked Rosa, the parts runner who knew half the shop's history better than Bill did. She had a bandana around her hair and grease on her cheek she hadn't noticed. Bill didn't answer at first. He watched the motor like it might blink. "I want the truth to draw a crowd," he said finally. "Not me." The truth, plain as iron. The engine didn't start. And it had embarrassed people with badges and business cards, people who pronounced Caterpillar like a brand partnership instead of a machine that could break your toe if you set it down wrong. The company had pulled funding. The prototype was stuck here like a stranded ship. Phones were up, elbows found door frames, and the crowd split when David Miller walked in. He could have been a consultant for a new condo development, clean blue blazer, slim black toolbox with foam cutouts, white-soled shoes. His watch caught the light and threw it around the room like an announcement. "Mr. Turner," he said, extending a hand that had never been cut by sheet metal. "David Miller. Pleasure." Bill shook because he wasn't rude, not because he was impressed. "Tools?" David flipped the latches on his case. Each piece was seated like jewelry. He smiled. "Calibrated yesterday." "Coffee?" Rosa offered. "Espresso, if you have it," David said, not joking. Rosa chuckled and walked away. "Rules are simple," Bill said. "No team, no internet. 1 hour to make it breathe. You don't get it started. You tell me where the life is and why it isn't coming. That's worth something too." David looked at the engine like a surgeon being handed a heart. "I'll take the full hour," he said, already opening a tablet to a schematic he'd stored offline. He spoke for the crowd as much as for Bill. "We'll start with sensors, then verify fuel delivery, then scope timing variance under crank. If the PCM's dead, we'll simulate." The door clacked again. Shoes with the heels worn sideways, a coat that used to be tan, a face that had learned every kind of weather. The man kept to the shadow of the door until someone told him to move so others could see. He moved, slow, and came all the way inside. Several people recognized him in the way people recognize someone they avoid. Eyes, then turn away. The guy from down by the commuter tracks. The one who slept under the billboard with the broken light. Some called him Sammy, others didn't call him anything. He stood a few feet from the Caterpillar and set down nothing because he had brought nothing. He didn't touch the engine. He didn't even look directly at it. He looked at the floor first, and then at Bill, like a man asking to enter a church after closing. "Sir," he said softly, "may I try?" A laugh snorted out from a kid near the door. "You got magic pockets, old man?" David glanced over, more annoyed at the interruption than anything. "Look, this isn't a carbureted V8 out of a junkyard Impala," he said, to no one in particular. "This is precision." Bill studied the man's hands. They were cracked but clean at the edges, nails short, a sheen of old oil sunk deep in the lines like a tattoo. Not the hands of a drinker, the hands of somebody who had spent years learning the difference between a tick and a knock. "What's your name?" Bill asked. "Samuel," the man said, then seemed to test how it sounded. "Samuel Brooks. Folks call me Sammy." "Tools?" Bill asked. Sammy patted his coat pockets as if the answer might change. He pulled out a folded feeler gauge, the steel leaves worn to light. He offered it like a business card. "I can listen," he added. "You can't listen to a motor that won't turn," someone said. Sammy didn't argue. He stepped closer, careful, respectful of the mass. He set his palm on the block and closed his eyes, like a man greeting an old friend who'd forgotten his name. Bill lifted a brow. The crowd lifted their phones. David cleared his throat, reclaiming the room. "With respect," he said, already attaching a diagnostic lead to a harness pigtail, "I'll begin." The next minutes moved on two rails. On one, David's process, efficient, articulate, bright with measurement. He checked continuity, logged pressure, verified injector pulse with a Noid light. His voice was calm, professional. Fuel pressure nominal, throttle body responsive. Cam sensor shows signal. Crank sensor intermittent. He frowned, only slightly, when the scope trace jittered. On the other rail, Sammy's quiet orbit. He circled the engine, head tilted, ear near the timing cover, then the intake, then the back of the block. He lifted the feeler gauge to the light, as if checking his own honesty. He breathed in the warm, cold scent of metal that had been run and left and run again. He knelt and looked under the bell housing at nothing in particular and everything at once. Rosa returned with 2 paper cups of burnt coffee and handed one to Bill. "He reminds me of your dad," she said softly, chin toward Sammy. "My dad would have told him to get to work or get out," Bill said, but his voice wasn't unkind. David's toolbox clicked like a metronome. "If we can crank it, I can see timing scatter," he said. He hit the starter. The motor rolled over once, twice, with the thick sound of a beast turning in sleep. Then a harsh metallic kiss. Not a grind, not a bang, something off by a breath. David stopped, lips pressed thin. "There it is." "What do you hear?" Bill asked. "Signal drop," David answered, eyes on data. "Could be a failing crank sensor, could be the reluctor wheel out of alignment. The variance is odd." "May I?" Sammy asked. He was already moving, not to the tablet or the harness, but to the crank pulley. He squinted at the timing marks, then at the pointer. He measured nothing with a tool, but everything with a gaze so still it felt like waiting out a thunderstorm. He slid the feeler gauge between a tone wheel and the sensor bracket, like a violinist finding a note. He didn't force it. He adjusted, breathed, withdrew. "It's not the sensor," he murmured. Someone scoffed. "With that? Man, come on." Sammy stood. The sunlight through the high windows laid a long rectangle across his face, showing eyes the color of lake water in winter. He looked at Bill, not at the crowd. "You want it to breathe?" he asked. Bill folded his arms. "I want the truth." "The truth is, it's in time but out of rhythm," Sammy said. "Like the marks line up on paper, but the song is off in your bones." He tapped the timing cover with a knuckle. Soft once. Something about the way the wheel talks to the sensor. Not broken. Just shy. David exhaled through his nose. "That isn't a diagnosis," he said. "No," Sammy said. "It's a direction." The room held its breath. Outside, a freight train moaned through the east side, and the sound slid under the bay doors like a reminder of bigger machines moving. Bill set his coffee down on the workbench, leaving a wet ring. He had seen men bluff with confidence, and men speak with quiet certainty. Only one kind ever fixed things when it mattered. He nodded once to Rosa. "Start the hour," he said, then to both men evenly. "Show me you're listening." Rosa tapped her phone timer. The crowd pressed closer. David bent over his scope. Sammy placed his palm on the cover again, listening with the whole length of himself. The caterpillar ticked, as if counting along. The shop air thickened with expectation. Rosa's timer counted down on her phone, its glow faint against the walls cluttered with calendars from the 90s, shelves of carb cleaner, and yellowed invoices that nobody had thrown away. A hushed current ran through the people pressed shoulder to shoulder. Some leaned against doorframes, others perched on tool chests. They weren't just watching an engine, they were watching pride on trial. David worked with crisp efficiency. His movements were clean, almost rehearsed. He checked wiring continuity, adjusted his probes, and scrolled through data streams on his tablet. Every so often he muttered jargon that sounded impressive, even if most of the crowd didn't understand. Intermittent signal variance, possible harmonic imbalance. The words hung in the air like smoke, designed to make onlookers nod. Sammy, meanwhile, didn't speak. He moved around the block as though circling an old animal he once knew. His eyes narrowed not at the screens, but at the faint irregular clicks in the starter's rotation, the whisper of air escaping through a valve that wasn't sealed right. His fingertips lingered on bolts, seams, brackets, tracing vibrations that most people would miss. Bill watched both men, his arms crossed. Years of running the shop had taught him that brilliance wasn't always loud. Sometimes it hid behind worn boots and silence. Pressure's fine, fuel's steady, ignition's good. But crank sync is all over the place, David announced, shaking his head like he'd cornered the problem. He addressed the crowd more than Bill, his voice sharp. "You see, prototype parts like these, tolerances slip. We'll need a full teardown to locate the misalignment." "Teardown?" Rosa echoed under her breath, eyebrows lifting. David straightened. "Only way to be sure." Sammy finally spoke, his voice low and calm. "It's not the whole engine, just the heart's beat." The crowd chuckled nervously. A kid near the door whispered, "Crazy talk." But Bill's eyes narrowed. He'd heard mechanics use poetry before, men so in tune with machines they spoke of them like family. "What do you mean, Brooks?" Bill asked. Sammy crouched by the timing cover again. He pulled the feeler gauge, slipped one leaf between the sensor bracket and tone wheel, adjusted by the width of a hair. "It's whispering too soon, just by a breath." David scoffed. "You can't feel timing." Sammy didn't answer. He tapped the crank pulley with his knuckle, then nodded once, satisfied. He rose and stepped back. "Try it again." Bill hesitated, then gestured to Rosa. She crossed to the starter switch on the wall and twisted. The engine coughed, a single backfire like a gunshot, then fell silent. The crowd gasped. David shook his head, lips tight. "Exactly. Misfire. Needs teardown." But Sammy's eyes sharpened. "Again." Rosa looked at Bill. Bill nodded. The starter whined, the flywheel spun, and this time the caterpillar grumbled. Rough, uneven, but alive. The ground trembled under its weight. It sputtered like a smoker clearing his throat, then steadied for 3 seconds before dying out. The garage went silent again, except for the smell. Sharp fuel, hot oil, the first breath of a sleeping giant. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "He made it run." "No way, just luck." "Did you hear that thing? It wanted to go." David stepped forward, jaw tight. "That doesn't prove anything. The issue's still internal. He got a fluke spark, that's all." Sammy didn't argue. He looked at Bill, eyes steady. "It's talking. It's close." Bill's throat tightened. For a moment he saw his father again, old Earl Turner, who once tuned an engine by ear in the middle of a thunderstorm when no tools would stay dry. The hum of instinct was rare, and it was standing right in front of him, dressed in rags. The clock ticked. 40 minutes left. David bent harder into his diagnostics, sweat now dotting his forehead. He stripped a harness, checked continuity again, and cursed under his breath when the readings looked clean. His confidence was slipping. Sammy sat on an overturned milk crate, watching, waiting. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't panicked. He whispered to himself, phrases too low for anyone else to catch, like he was remembering an old rhythm from another life. Finally, David slammed his tablet shut. This is a waste of time. The crank sensor's toast. Without a replacement, you won't get reliable sync. Done. He looked around, expecting agreement, but the crowd's eyes weren't on him. They were on Sammy, who stood again, slipped the feeler gauge back into place, and adjusted by less than the width of a fingernail. His hands didn't shake. "Try it once more," he said. Rosa glanced at Bill. Bill nodded. The switch turned. The caterpillar coughed, sputtered, then roared. This time the sound filled the entire shop, bouncing off steel and concrete, deep and strong. It was rough, uneven, but it was running. The crowd erupted. Shouts, claps, disbelief. Phones shot upward, recording. David paled. His polished shoes suddenly looked ridiculous on the oil-stained floor. Sammy didn't celebrate. He stepped back, arms at his sides, letting the engine speak for itself. His eyes, though, carried something deeper, a weight of memory, of nights on cold concrete, of the life he'd lost. Bill's chest tightened. He saw genius, but also pain. And he knew. There was more to Samuel Brooks than torn boots and a homeless man's reputation. And in that rumble, in that thunder rising from steel and fire, the past began to stir. The Caterpillar V8 rattled on, rough at first, then steadier, as though reluctant to admit it was alive. The shop vibrated under its weight, tools trembling on pegboards, bolts buzzing in their trays. For the first time in months, Turner's garage didn't feel like a graveyard. It felt like a heartbeat. The crowd cheered, half in disbelief, half in thrill. Phones caught every second, the blue glow of screens mixing with the orange light from the overhead lamps. David stood stiff, his polished shoes speckled with oil. His jaw flexed, but no words came. He had walked in expecting to be the hero. Now he was just another man in a room full of witnesses. Sammy took 2 steps back, his eyes steady on the engine. He didn't smile, he didn't pump his fists. He simply breathed, as though hearing an old song after years of silence. Bill raised his palm. The noise of the crowd dipped. He twisted the switch on the wall, and the caterpillar coughed once before dying back into silence. The sudden quiet felt heavier than the roar. "All right," Bill said. His voice cut through the room like a wrench dropped on concrete. "Tell me how you knew." Sammy looked down at his boots. The laces were frayed, the leather cracked from rain and cold. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then his voice came, low but firm. "I've heard that sound before. Not this engine, not this model, but that rhythm, the hesitation when the sensor doesn't kiss the wheel right. You can read it on a scope, but you can feel it too, the way it breathes." David finally found his voice. "Feel? That's not engineering. That's superstition." Sammy lifted his eyes, and for the first time his gaze was sharp. "You think numbers save machines. Numbers are only shadows of the truth. Steel talks if you listen." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some smirked, others nodded like they'd heard echoes of their own fathers or grandfathers in Sammy's words. Bill studied the man closely. He'd seen plenty of drifters pass through Detroit, men broken by layoffs, addiction, or worse. But there was something else in Sammy, the way he handled the gauge, the way his palms knew where to rest. That wasn't luck. That was muscle memory. "Where'd you learn that?" Bill pressed. The room fell quiet again. Even Rosa leaned forward, waiting. Sammy's lips parted, then closed. He rubbed the side of his face with calloused fingers, as if debating whether to speak. Finally, his voice broke out, raw. 20 years ago, I owned a shop not far from here. Brooks & Sons Automotive. That's what the sign said. Though I only had one son, Daniel. We had contracts with the plants, steady work, good money. For a while, I thought I had everything. The crowd stilled. Even David's frown faltered. Sammy's voice deepened. Then came a job tied to city contracts. Big money, big pressure. They wanted us to pass inspections we knew were crooked. Parts that failed under stress, engines that weren't ready but had deadlines. I said no. His eyes grew dark, distant. And just like that, the phone stopped ringing. Accounts froze. Bank called the loans. My wife, she couldn't take it. Packed up, left with Daniel. I lost the shop, the house, everything. He paused. The silence in the garage was heavy. The crowd shifted, unsure whether to pity him or doubt him. Bill's chest tightened. He knew that story. Different details, same shape. Detroit had chewed up men like Sammy before, men who refused to bend when the system asked them to. So you ended up here, Rosa whispered. Sammy nodded. Here and nowhere. I fix what I can for a meal, patch up old radios, mend watches when people trust me with them. But engines never stopped talking to me, even when no one else would. A long breath passed through the room. David scoffed, breaking the spell. So what? You're a fallen saint of mechanics? You expect us to believe some sob story just because you made it cough once? The crowd's mood shifted instantly. Murmurs of disapproval rose, and someone muttered, "Shut up, suit." Bill held up a hand. His eyes stayed on Sammy. You got proof of what you say? Anything left? Sammy reached into his coat pocket. His fingers trembled slightly as he pulled out a folded photo, edges torn, colors faded. He handed it to Bill. Bill unfolded it carefully. A younger Sammy, clean-shaven, stood in front of a shop sign. Brooks & Sons Automotive. A boy of about 10 sat on his shoulders, grinning, one arm raised like a mechanic's apprentice, showing off. Bill felt something press in his chest. He passed the photo to Rosa, who passed it to the nearest hands. It went around the room in silence. Sammy cleared his throat. I'm not asking for pity, just a chance to stand where I once stood, to prove that I can still make something breathe. For a moment, nobody spoke. The sound of a distant freight train moaned through the city, as if the world itself paused to listen. Bill's gaze didn't waver. He saw the crowd waiting on his verdict, saw David's pride hanging by a thread, saw Sammy's life dangling in this moment. Finally, Bill stepped forward, his boots heavy on the concrete. He extended his hand. You proved more than that today. You proved you've still got fire. Sammy looked at the hand like it was a lifeline. Slowly, with hesitation born of years spent unseen, he reached out and shook it. His grip was strong, steady, alive. The crowd erupted in applause, louder, deeper than before. David turned away, his face red. For him, this was over. For Sammy, it was only beginning. And for Bill, something stirred in his chest. A thought that maybe, just maybe, this old garage could be more than a tomb for rust and dust. Maybe it could rise again. The applause faded slowly, like echoes in an empty hall. Bill kept his hand locked with Sammy's a moment longer, studying him with the eyes of a man who had lived through too many disappointments. There was no weakness in Sammy's grip, only truth, only weight. When Bill finally let go, he didn't speak right away. He paced in front of the Caterpillar, boots crunching on loose bolts scattered on the floor. The old shop smelled of oil and burnt dust, but under it was something sharper. Anticipation. Engines are one thing, Bill said at last, his voice low but clear. But one good trick doesn't mean you belong here. The crowd, still buzzing, hushed. Rosa crossed her arms, watching. Sammy didn't flinch. I'm not here for pity. Tell me what you want. Bill stopped, turned to face him. I want proof. Not just that you can hear steel whisper, but that you can stand the grind of real work. A shop's not just about turning bolts, it's about trust, stamina, the kind of grit that doesn't wash off at the end of the day. David, who had been sulking near his toolbox, smirked. Finally, some sense. The man's a drifter, Turner. He can't hold a wrench for more than an hour. Bill ignored him. He pointed at a broken-down pickup in the corner, its hood open, dust caked thick on every surface. That truck's been sitting 6 months. Nobody wants to touch it because it eats parts and spits them out. You make that run before sundown, I'll believe you belong in this shop. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The test wasn't impossible, but it was brutal. Sammy looked at the truck, then back at Bill. What's wrong with it? Bill's lips pressed into a thin line. Everything. The crowd chuckled nervously. Rosa arched a brow, impressed. Sammy walked to the truck, laid his hand on the hood as he had with the Caterpillar. The metal was cold, lifeless, as though it had given up long ago. He took a breath, closed his eyes. I'll do it. David barked a laugh. With what tools? That rusty leaf gauge. This isn't guesswork, old man. This is real engineering. Bill's gaze snapped to David. Then maybe you should stay and watch how real engineering looks when it's lived, not just learned. The crowd whooped, enjoying the jab. David's face darkened, but he stayed. Pride kept his shoes planted. Sammy rolled his sleeves, revealing arms wiry but strong, lined with scars of old burns and cuts. He picked up a battered wrench from Bill's bench, tested the weight in his hand. For the first time, his lips curved into the ghost of a smile. Feels familiar. Hours stretched thin. The crowd thinned but never vanished. Curiosity chained them to the spectacle. Sammy moved slowly, methodically. He didn't rush, didn't panic. He drained oil black as tar, pulled the plugs, checked compression with nothing but instinct, and a thumb pressed against the hole. He listened, smelled, felt. Rosa leaned toward Bill. He's not fixing parts. He's reading it. Bill nodded, though his jaw was tight. He wanted to believe, but belief was dangerous. David paced like a caged animal, muttering about wasted time, about how real mechanics needed equipment. But the more Sammy worked, the more the whispers in the crowd turned against him. By late afternoon, the sun cast long golden bars across the garage floor. Sweat streaked Sammy's temples. His shirt clung to his back. His hands bore fresh cuts where old bolts resisted. But the truck, once silent, now stood with its heart open, wires cleaned, timing reset, fuel lines coaxed into place. Sammy wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. He looked at Bill. Ready? Bill studied him a long moment, then nodded to Rosa. She turned the key. The engine cranked, hesitated, then roared to life, coughing smoke before settling into a steady idle. The sound wasn't perfect. It was rough, uneven, but it was alive. The crowd erupted louder than before. Cheers shook the rafters. Phones flew up. For a brief second, the old garage felt like the beating heart of Detroit again. Sammy leaned against the fender, chest rising heavy, face shining with sweat and grease. He didn't bask in the applause. His eyes flickered with something deeper, fear, hope, and the quiet ache of a man who had tasted dignity again and didn't want to lose it. Bill stepped closer, his voice just loud enough for Sammy to hear over the noise. You didn't just fix a truck, you fixed something bigger. Sammy's throat worked, but no words came. David, red-faced and shaking, finally snapped. This is absurd. He's a fraud. Some washed up has been. You're all falling for a story. Bill's eyes cut sharp to him. You call this fraud? That truck's breathing because of him, not because of your gadgets. David looked around, searching for support, but the crowd's eyes told him he had already lost. Bill turned back to Sammy, his expression softer now. I don't hand out chances easy, but you've earned one. Tomorrow you come back, not as a drifter, as a mechanic. The crowd cheered again, and Rosa smiled, eyes shining. Sammy's chest tightened. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him like he belonged. He swallowed hard. "I'll be here." And in that promise, heavy and trembling, the night ahead suddenly felt brighter than any he had known in decades. The next morning, the garage smelled of fresh coffee and warm oil. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, painting long beams across the concrete floor. Bill arrived earlier than usual, his boots echoing in the quiet. He found himself staring at the old sign above the door, Turner's Garage, and for the first time in years he imagined another name sharing the space. Rosa was already there, humming as she organized parts bins. "You didn't sleep, did you?" she teased, catching the heavy circles under Bill's eyes. "Didn't need to," Bill replied, pouring himself a bitter cup. "Been a long time since this place had a spark. Yesterday, it felt alive again." As if on cue, the door creaked open. Sammy stepped inside, wearing the same worn coat, but with cleaner clothes underneath, a shirt freshly washed, jeans without holes. He carried no toolbox, just his folded feeler gauge tucked carefully in his pocket. His eyes flicked around the shop like he was stepping into a memory instead of a workplace. "Morning," he said softly. Bill studied him. "You came back." "I said I would." The simplicity of the words carried weight. Too many promises in Sammy's life had been broken. This one he wouldn't let join the pile. Rosa grinned. "Coffee's hot. Might taste like axle grease, but it'll keep you upright." Sammy gave her the smallest smile, then wrapped his hands around the steaming cup she poured. For a moment, he looked like any other mechanic starting his day. Not long after, the door swung wide again. David appeared, sharp suit replaced by casual clothes, though still too polished for the grease-stained shop. His jaw was set. "You're making a mistake, Turner," he said, skipping a greeting. "You're putting faith in a man who doesn't even own a wrench." Bill didn't flinch. "Sometimes a man doesn't need a $1,000 toolbox to prove his worth." David bristled. "I could make this shop profitable in months. Contracts, investors, connections. You're choosing a has-been over the future." Sammy stood silent, eyes on the floor. Bill's gaze hardened. "Future without integrity isn't worth a damn. You had your chance. You showed me numbers. He showed me heart." The words landed heavy. David's face flushed, his lips pressed tight. Without another word, he turned and stormed out, the door slamming hard behind him. The silence after his exit felt like the calm after a storm. Bill turned to Sammy. "You want more than just a job?" Sammy blinked. "What do you mean?" Bill gestured around the garage. Walls lined with history, racks of tools, engines in different stages of decay. "This place is dying. My boys went their own way, no interest in keeping it alive. But yesterday, I saw what you still have in you. Not just skill, fire, integrity. This shop needs that more than it needs me." Sammy's throat tightened. He set his cup down, staring at the steam curling upward. "I don't know if I'm the man for that anymore." "Then learn to be," Bill said. His voice carried no softness, only truth. "Not for me. For yourself. For that boy in the picture you showed me. For the man you used to be." Rosa slipped the photo from her apron pocket. She'd kept it safe after it made its way around the crowd. She handed it back to Sammy. "Looks like he believed in you once. Maybe it's time you do the same." Sammy's hand trembled as he took the faded picture. Daniel's smile stared back at him, bright, innocent, untouched by the world's cruelty. His chest ached. "I don't even know where they are now," he whispered. "Then fixing this shop might be the first step to finding them," Rosa said gently. Bill nodded. "Partnership, Sammy, 50-50. You keep the engines breathing, I'll keep the lights on. We rebuild Turner's Garage together. You in?" The words hit Sammy like a punch and a lifeline all at once. Partnership. After years of invisibility, after nights under bridges, after mornings waking cold and hungry, someone was offering not just a job, but a place, a purpose. Sammy swallowed hard. His voice shook, but it carried steady. "I'm in." Bill extended his hand. This time Sammy didn't hesitate. Their grips met, rough palms against rough palms, sealing more than an agreement, sealing hope. Rosa clapped her hands, breaking the heaviness. "Well then, partners, we got work to do. That caterpillar's still got a cough, and the bills won't pay themselves." The three of them laughed, and for the first time in years the sound filled the garage with warmth instead of emptiness. Outside, Detroit moved on with its noise and smoke, unaware that inside a small, forgotten workshop, a man had just been reborn. The days that followed felt like a slow resurrection. Word of the challenge spread across Detroit, through auto forums, coffee shops, even whispered in the corners of factories where workers longed for stories of pride. Turner's garage, once fading into rust, now buzzed with footsteps and phone calls. Sammy arrived every morning before sunrise. He scrubbed the concrete floor, sorted bolts by size, cleaned tools that hadn't been touched in years. His hands bore new cuts, fresh grease stains, but they also carried steadiness, purpose. For the first time in decades, he had somewhere to be, someone waiting for him. Bill, though gruff as ever, walked lighter. He barked orders but also shared stories, memories of his father, lessons about trust and grit. Rosa teased them both, running errands and managing parts, though she admitted she stayed mostly to witness history remade. One afternoon, a boy no older than 15 wandered into the garage, wide-eyed at the roar of the caterpillar, finally running smooth under Sammy's touch. "Can I watch?" he asked timidly. Sammy knelt, handing the boy a rag. "You can do more than that. Here, wipe the oil off this socket. That's where it all begins." The boy grinned, as though being included meant the world. Bill caught the scene and felt something stir. This was how legacies were born, not through contracts or polished resumes, but through hands teaching hands. Still, shadows lingered. Late at night, when the work was done and the city outside had gone quiet, Sammy would sit alone on a milk crate, photo of his son Daniel in hand. The shop's hum dimmed into silence, and he wondered if Daniel ever thought of him, or if the man he was now could ever earn his way back into his boy's life. One evening, as Sammy locked up, a car pulled to the curb. A figure stepped out, a man in his late 20s, hair dark, eyes sharp. For a heartbeat, Sammy froze. The world seemed to tilt. "Dad?" the young man said, voice trembling between anger and disbelief. Sammy's throat closed. The photo slipped from his pocket and landed face up on the concrete. Daniel bent, picked it up, and stared at the image of himself as a child on his father's shoulders. "You kept this," Daniel whispered. Sammy's voice cracked. "I never let go of you. Not once." The reunion wasn't easy. Tears didn't erase years of absence, and silence didn't erase pain. But as Daniel stepped inside the garage, looking at the walls and the machines, something softened in his eyes. "So this is where you've been rebuilding," he murmured. Bill and Rosa watched from the doorway, quiet witnesses to something greater than steel and fire, something only integrity and time could forge. That night, the caterpillar's steady rumble filled the air once more, not just as proof of mechanical genius, but as the anthem of redemption. For Sammy, it was never about the engine alone. It was about proving to the world, to his son, to himself, that a man can be broken, stripped of everything, and still rise if he refuses to sell his soul. As the crowd that had gathered applauded, Bill clapped Sammy's shoulder. "Looks like we've got more than an engine running again. We've got a family and a future." Sammy closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. For the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. He was whole. And if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Because sometimes all it takes is one spark to bring an engine and a soul back to life.